welcome back to the Sigma Show. I am your host, Super T Sigma of Sigma Programming. I appreciate your time and attention. Definitely. Let's talk about Christians who put the cross above Christ. Christians who put the cross above Christ. Be wary of Christians who put the cross above Christ. They preach under legalism, and legalism makes the cross everything. On the surface, this sounds good. On the surface, this sounds righteous. When you're just beginning in a Christian walk, this sounds like perfect logical sense. It sounds like sound doctrine. It sounds like true revelatory word, but is not. This is the unconscious worship of the Apostle Paul, who preached under legalism. The Apostle Paul is not wrong in his stance on legalism and on his stance on making the cross of Christ everything, because Paul was once Saul, and Saul was a persecutor of Christians. It was his job to put people on the cross. He was a Pharisee out of the tribe of Benjamin, the strictest sect of the Pharisees. Just like the Saul I talked about in another video, King Saul in David's day, they're from the same tribe, having the same name. This Paul of the New Testament was a persecutor of Christians, and it was his job to destroy the followers of Christ. So when Paul talks about the cross, it is coming from a place of guilt. This is why Paul refers to himself often as a slave of Christ Jesus Christ, because he was the one who enslaved people for believing in Jesus Christ. So the symbol for the death penalty is unknowingly venerated when you put the cross above Christ. You are not to put the cross above Christ if you are a Christian. It sounds good. I know your hymns say, down at the cross where you first saw the light and the burden of your heart rolled away. I understand that, but you are not to put a piece of wood ahead of the carpenter's son if you're coming from that cosmological side of things. If that's the case, then we ought to walk around preaching about the death penalty, and we ought to have electric chairs attached to our chains. If that's the case, we ought to have lethal injection needles attached to our necklaces when you pass by every church. If it's really all about the cross, we're talking about a death penalty symbol. If that's the case, then on top of every church steeple ought to be a picture or a sculpture of a firing squad, of an electric chair, of a gas chamber, of a group of people throwing stones. Whatever the death penalty of that day is, that is what you are unknowingly venerating when you put the cross above the Christ who carried it. The man who carried the cross is more important than the cross that he carried. We're talking about Jesus, right? Whether you believe in Jesus or not, just work with the information. This was a man who created miracles. This was a man who was humble. This was a man who taught things that were head and shoulders above all teachers before him, coming out of these particular sects, being Judaism and Christianity. Christ was head and shoulders above them. This is what the Pharisees said in their own scriptures. They said, we've heard a lot of teachers, and the magistrates were like, why did no one arrest this man? They reply, because we never heard a man talk like this. We have teachers of religious law that teach the law of Moses, but this man, we've never heard a man speak like this man has spoken before. This man is quite unlike the religious teachers. This man teaches with real authority, but you erase all the validity of that when you put the cross above the man who carried it. What about the lessons Jesus taught? What about the Beatitudes? What about blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God? What about the first will be last and the last will be first? What about can figs come from thorn bushes and thorns and thistles? What about in this day you will be with me in paradise? What about all the healings that took place? You erase all of that when you put the cross above Christ. And I know what a lot of legalistic Christians will say, and they would put the idea of Christ's sacrifice above all things. But you have to understand, if you're coming out of that theology, the cross of Christ is not the end of the faith, it's the beginning of the faith. It's the entry door into the faith. You don't put the front door of the house above the house. You can't sleep at the front door. You can't cook at the front door. The restroom is not located at the front door. You have to use the rest of the house. And when you put the cross above the Christ who carried the cross, I'm sorry, but you are putting the front door above the entire house. I don't care if that front door is a red door, meaning that the whole house was paid for. You still have to step into that house. He says, in my Father's house are many mansions. But when you put the cross above the Christ who carried the cross, you erase the many mansions and you put more emphasis on the doors into the mansions rather than the rooms in the mansions. Super T Sigma, Signal Programming. Don't let people mislead you, even in the right way. Peace.